Well, good evening and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. Well, I've got something a little bit different and interesting for you tonight. I'm joined by Mayor Nancy Peckford, who heads the United Counties of Leeds-Grenville, and she's here to talk a little bit about bringing strong, reliable internet access to her region. Mayor Peckford is an interesting individual. She was born in a small town, raised in a small town in Newfoundland, Labrador, and she wanted to move to North Grenville for her family and to raise her family in a more quiet environment. She's the past chair of the North Grenville Cooperative Preschool and Learning Center. She's currently involved in minor hockey, dance, soccer, and karate. Sounds like a lot of moms and dads here in Mississauga. She was the executive director of a nationally federally incorporated not-for-profit organization, and she is the mayor of I've never heard of this before. I've heard about Leeds-Grenville and stuff, but I've never heard about the United Counties. So you'll have to tell us a little bit about that. But I guess the issue is with us all staying home, internet access is really critical. So Mayor Peckford, thanks for joining us. Tell us what your issue is, please.
Yeah, well, obviously, when I was campaigning a couple of years ago, people would ask about rural broadband, and they were often asking in new subdivisions in and around the town of Kemptville, which has about 5,000 people. North Grenville, of course, is about 18,000, and we are growing fast, twice the provincial average. So we've accommodated a lot of new growth. And even with brand new subdivisions and houses in our community, lots and lots of people were are being challenged with rural broadband. So during the election, it was certainly something that was on my radar, but it was really the pandemic that has changed everything. And with the pandemic has come massive stress on a rural broadband system that is unreliable, incoherent, fragmented, and can't accommodate the kind of usage that families and businesses now need to live their day-to-day lives or to make ends meet as professionals or as business owners. So there's a lot of, I would say, distress in our community. Over 50% of residents, and this is reflective of the numbers in Eastern Ontario, are not able to meet the current FCC standard.
So you're breaking up a lot. Is that your own Wi-Fi, or are you going to blame that on the local broadband?
If I'm breaking up, it's my broadband. I'm sorry to tell you. Yeah.
So
do you want to continue?
No, please. Of course I want to continue.
Okay.
Why is this? Is it the big companies aren't paying attention to rural communities, or what's the problem?
Yeah, the infrastructure that you need for high-speed, reliable rural broadband tends to get built in big urban centers where the return on the investment is pretty quick and the investments are significant. So when you build outside of those, high-density urban centers, it's often an oversight. In fact, subdivision developers don't think about it. They're relying on old technology, maybe, telephone wires, and they're telling, prospective owners that they'll have good internet, and it's not true. And the municipalities are left, like us, municipal governments, are really left trying to deal with an untenable situation. We've also got bad weather here, and believe it or not, bad weather contributes to bad broadband. So in more rural parts of Eastern Ontario, we've just got a really, really fragmented system, and the infrastructure that's being built or has been built historically by the telecoms is not sufficient for today's needs. And the pandemic really accentuated that.
And so what are you going to do about it?
So I'm working with very closely with the Eastern Ontario Regional Network. And the good
Which is a brand new network, I understand?
No, actually, they've been around for over 10 years. They were involved in Eastern Ontario in building some of the early internet connectivity. This is about a decade ago. They worked with both levels of government, federal and provincial. There was a sort of a public-private partnership, if you will, to invest in some of the basic infrastructure to get people connected and to get them to what at that time, a decade ago, felt like a reasonable standard. But the technology has just advanced so much more quickly than the existing infrastructure. So just this past year, well before the pandemic, EORN was looking at the GIG project, which is to bring a gig to every home institution across Eastern Ontario. That was something that was already being examined. Engineers had gotten involved. Costing was obviously foreseen. And at this stage, it is a shovel-ready project for all of the 114 municipalities in Eastern Ontario that are represented by EORN. That's 25% of all the municipalities in Ontario. And they are working, as I am, as part of their team, to really secure a $200 million grant from the federal government, $200 million from the provincial government, and some infrastructure financing that will allow the from which telecoms would benefit, because then they have a customer base that they can service at a higher level of broadband in terms of speeds and data. And in the long run, that's good for them, and I think it's good for Eastern Ontario.
I apologize, but why wouldn't the telecoms put this investment in anyway? Why is it federal and provincial governments that have to spend
Well,
$400
every
grand?
county, so North Grenville is part of a upper tier, lower tier government. So through the tax base here and across Eastern Ontario, every resident and commercial property will contribute to this project, because every single county of the 15 counties that represents the over 100 municipalities that are part of this project will pay into it as well. It's the ideal public-private partnership. The public money on the table will leverage another $500 million in investment from the telecoms, who stand to benefit, for decades to come from an expanded customer base that will pay appropriately for improved service. So everyone wins, but we need both levels of government at the table.
And you're saying it's breaking down and the telecoms aren't putting the money in because it's rural and it's far higher infrastructure
the return
investment?
on investment, it doesn't look the same as it does obviously in Mississauga or some other highly urbanized areas. So it's a lot of upfront money and it's a slow return. You will get your return, but it's not at the same pace in urban areas. So they are reluctant, and they too have limited resources. So when they're facing choices between Eastern Ontario and the fast growing GTA, for example, or parts of Ottawa, where their shareholders are going to want them to spend the money. But the reality is, with a pandemic, we have to start treating rural broadband like an essential service. And it's not that we want the public sector to do it alone, but they have to be a partner at the table. And given the real emphasis, from schooling to healthcare to online business services, to suggest that Eastern Ontarians have the same choices to access virtual services as the rest of sort of urban Ontario is entirely false. So we have to figure out, do we want a level playing field or don't we?
Fascinating. And so effectively what you're saying is, access to water, access to hydro, access to healthcare, we got to add in access to broadband as one of those fundamental rights that Canadians have.
You've got it. And the federal minister has said already, this is Minister Maryam Elsef, she's the minister responsible for rural economic development. She has said quite clearly that she is open to considering declaring internet broadband, access to broadband, as an essential service. So the federal government would treat it as such. But this is a complicated country. We need all governments sort of on the same page about that. And that's why EORN's work is to deal with the provinces, regional governments like the counties, to see if we get everything in the same direction.
Now, just out of interest, other public utilities that you have to supply, like electricity, must similarly be very expensive or far more expensive to supply in a rural environment. How is that done? Is that something that is funded by your political structure of government and then just charged out to the residents?
I would say no, not in many instances. So I would imagine there were public investments, right, in, for example, hydro and utility poles, right? I think similarly to what we're saying about broadband today, there's a precedent in this country for obviously investing in public transportation and public utilities. So I don't think we're breaking in any way from the past. But I think the challenge is that some of the maybe not necessarily the decision makers, but some of the individuals in Ottawa, and I mean more at the public service level, may not appreciate the severity of the problem. And that's fair, because before the pandemic, people were getting by. They were adjusting, they were accommodating. Most people left their homes every day to report to work somewhere else, where obviously if you needed good broadband, you had good broadband. But with the pandemic, overnight, people were relying on their internet service providers. They were reduced to their ISP as a way to get by. Everything from working from home, learning from home, healthcare from home, doing your business from home. And that landscape changed so dramatically. I think it's understandable that neither level of government truly appreciated the urgency that wasn't really there in the same way until the pandemic struck.
So make the argument to my listeners in urban GTA, if you could. Why should they be subsidizing the residents of rural Eastern Ontario because they choose to live in a more lower density pastoral environment?
I love your question. You know why I love your question? Because some of the biggest proponents for this are farmers. So you can imagine large-scale agricultural producers in this region are desperate. Increasingly, it's automation. Increasingly, it's relying on GPS technology. Increasingly, they need the broadband to farm and do the work they do every day, on which many Ontarians rely. So this isn't about catering, to the person who wants to come home and stream Netflix every night, after a long day at work. This is about enabling, and I think really ensuring that our economic development opportunities across the province are such that we reap the strongest benefits from the activity that we see from every part of Ontario. So when we look at the return on investment, it is huge. It's in the billions every single year to give rural Ontarians the same capacity to generate revenue and GDP to the same extent as we would in urban areas. So the returns are meaningful, and in the long run, they strengthen the whole province, and then we can rely less on urban Ontarians to ensure we're solvent and we're able to, obviously ensure a good quality of life for everyone.
I hear lots of rumors of people vacating Toronto and moving to Muskoka or to Collingwood. Are people in Ottawa coming to Kemptville to live?
Again, you're right on the money. It's exactly what's happening here. We have a very, very hot real estate market. We can't keep listings on MLS for more than 2 days. People are fleeing cities for obvious reasons, especially in a pandemic. They want a little more space to stretch their legs. We're 30 minutes south of Ottawa. We're not in the boonies, right? And I think that's the other point here. The city of Ottawa itself, being both an urban and rural kind of fusion, post-amalgamation, they've got thousands of residents who struggle with rural broadband themselves. So the appetite to live outside of densely populated areas is one that we offer residents across the province. We're not saying that you can't leave a city. So if we're going to do that, and we're looking at the economic benefit of more people living in low density areas, then I think we have to be systematic and thoughtful about how they can be their most productive, obviously in smaller towns. And, Kemptville, again, has huge growth, twice the provincial average, or I should say North Grenville is an amalgamated municipality, but the growth is in an urban center. And the reality is, even in this urban center, because we're smaller in comparison to a big city, we don't have the infrastructure either. So this is not about, investing in households or small businesses in the boonies. It's about making sure that small growing towns on the periphery of large cities are well serviced by rural broadband, because it's critical.
We're chatting tonight with Mayor Nancy Peckford, who heads the United Counties of Leeds, Grenville, and Eastern Ontario, about broadband internet access to rural communities. Stay with us. We're going to take a quick break for messages and come right back in just a minute. Well, welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. We're chatting tonight with Mayor Nancy Peckford, who heads the United Counties of Leeds, Grenville in Eastern Ontario. She's got hot under the collar in regards to internet broadband access for rural residents. So, Your Worship, Mayor Peckford, how did you get into politics? You just ran and won 2 years ago in 2018. Is that correct?
That's right.
But your resume says that you've been active in politics for a long period of time. So you're one of these long-term political activists?
Well, I was living and working in Ottawa, and for nearly 20 years, my professional life was leading not-for-profit organizations, including an organization that spent a lot of time on youth engagement and women in leadership. I was here in my own community of North Granville. It was a newer community for me, and I noticed that the way that municipal governance was taking place here wasn't something I was particularly satisfied with. And as we got closer to the municipal election in 2018, I kept looking around for a candidate I could get excited about and, reflected some of my values. I'm the mom of 3 school-age kids. So, I was a very active parent, but I was, largely spending my professional time in Ottawa. And I kept waiting for that candidate who didn't show up. And at a certain point, I thought, if I don't get in the race, I'm going to disappoint myself, not because I think I could necessarily win it, but because I wanted to ensure that the community had a choice. And at the end of the day, I felt that my value set, which I thought reflected a lot of the perspectives of people here in North Grenville, should be something that was part of the campaign process. And then you let the people speak, right? So,
well, I guess if you were the executive director, if you were the executive director of an organization for women in leadership, you sort of put your money where your mouth was.
It was, a lot of people said, run as a counselor first. Don't do the mayor thing right away. Get your feet wet, see how you feel. And I know the passion and energy I have for leadership positions. And I thought, if I'm going to do this, I really have to go for the top position, because I wanted to set a tone and a value sort of set for the community that I thought was what North Grenville needed right now. And it was really up to, obviously, the voters to decide whether or not that's what they wanted. And here we are 2 years later.
Well, I have to tell you, I've met and interviewed numerous different mayors from across Ontario, and a lot of I've met a lot of different rural mayors. You're not quite what my picture is of a rural mayor. So I congratulate you on being elected. Let me ask you, since you were the executive director of Women in Leadership, first female minister of finance in Canada's history. What do you think of that?
I think it's a long time coming. It's funny, as you may have said, I was born and raised in Newfoundland. And Newfoundland had its first finance minister 3 years ago, right? PEI appointed a finance minister, I think 5 years ago. Saskatchewan had its own. So I'm not diminishing the significance of the federal arena. Of course, it's very significant and it's a different arena. But it was about time. It was about time. So I think we've got someone very capable for the job, who's got the trust of the Prime Minister, which is clearly important at this stage. And I think she'll do just fine. I really do. But I think it was a long time coming, right? We worked directly with the Right Honourable Kim Campbell subsequent to her tenure. And she often reflected on the Mulroney era, where there were a number of, I'll say, atypical appointments to defense, to international trade at that time. So, almost every other glass ceiling had been broken except for finance. So it was nice to see it happen.
And what glass ceiling are you going to break next?
That's a great question. I think I am a little bit atypical as a younger female mayor, an active parent. I am a hockey mom and dance mom. I have a pretty busy parenting life, but I think what I'm offering the community is a lot of visibility, a lot of accessibility, a lot of important dialogue. I have to say, I have a really great collaborative council. We've really come together to deliver on what we think North Grenville voted for in 2018. And it's a pleasure to govern alongside colleagues who are equally talented and equally committed to the same goal, and really try to stay positive. There's a lot of challenges to the growth we've seen in North Grenville. But there's lots of reasons, I think, to be excited about democracy and to be excited about politics. And I think if we keep it real and keep it honest and think long-term and think strategically about things like rural broadband, it's not an issue I had to get behind, quite frankly, but I could see how much it mattered. And while it's not municipal jurisdiction, it matters. It's a reality for my residents and businesses. And my job is to be their champion. And I'm a tenacious champion. So I'm really honored to serve.
Well, you certainly come across as a tenacious champion. So just as we say goodbye, do you have a message for young people that are looking at you, looking at Chrystia Friedland, looking at opportunities. Are glass ceilings gone, or is it still a struggle, or what?
It's another great question. I've been so well received here in North Grenville, I have to say. And I think actually what was interesting about my candidacy when I was running for mayor is I was the only woman. I was the only candidate under the age of 50 at the time. So I think actually the community really embraced, or certainly an aspect of the community embraced what I had to offer. So I really think if you're excited about politics, not everyone is. A lot of people are turned off by it, or they think it's a waste of time. I think if you have energy for politics, if you have energy for making a public contribution, I think a lot of women bide their time and they actually wait too long. And I would say that's true of new Canadians or younger men and women who think, oh, do I have the experience? Is it my time? I think if you have a passion for politics, you should really rise to the challenge and see what comes of it. There's lots of different ways to contribute. It doesn't have to be in an elected capacity. You can staff a great mayor or a great MP or MPP. There's lots of ways to get involved, but really just step up. We need so many Canadians to step up.
Step up. That's a good adage. Mayor Nancy Peckford, who heads the United Counties of Leeds Grenville, thanks so much for joining us tonight. I really appreciate it.
I should clarify, I'm not the leader. I'm not the warden of the United Counties, but I am as a key spokesperson for the counties on rural broadband.
Excellent. Well, thank you for joining us tonight. Mayor
Thanks
Nancy Peckford.
Brian.
Have a great evening.
All the best.
Well, that's the Brian Crombie Radio Hour for tonight on Saga 960. You can join us every Monday through Friday at 6 p.m. or you can stream us online at www.saga960am.ca, or you can get all my podcasts and videocasts online after the fact at briancrombie.com. Have a great evening, everybody.